He used to think betrayal sounded like clinking glasses at someone else's celebration or whispered messages behind a locked screen. But the real betrayal began with her laugh, the same laugh that once filled their home like music, now a warning siren in an 8-second clip from a home security camera. One moment, one smile, one unfamiliar man. That was all it took to unravel everything he'd spent 15 years building. Stability, an illusion, love, easy to counterfeit when the rehearsals for a perfect family life play out behind carefully curated words like emotional freedom and female self-realization. He didn't expect a war, but it came. Not from the outside, but from within the walls of his home, from the bedroom where not long ago 3 of them slept, him, her, and their trust. But what do you do when you're betrayed not just as a husband, but as a father, as a man? When the ones who were supposed to protect your world start tearing it down? He didn't yell. He didn't run. He started gathering evidence, quietly, methodically, step by step. Her personal growth turned out to be a covert scheme. His silence, a survival strategy. The stakes now couldn't be higher. Family, children, reputation. And on the other side, a charismatic coach with a trail of ruined lives and a woman who lost herself chasing freedom. This isn't just an ending. This is the finish, where victory belongs not to the loudest, but to the one who remains human. Greetings, my dear friend. I am very happy that you are watching my video, and I will be even happier if you subscribe to my channel. This will make me even happier. Let's get started. Mason Trenton's gaze froze on his phone. The screen lit up with a push notification from his home security app, one that instantly gripped his attention. The ping had arrived in the middle of a lunch meeting. Unusual movement detected in the master bedroom at precisely 1:50 p.m. It was a Tuesday. He was scheduled to be in Pennsylvania no sooner than Thursday. His entire week was booked solid in Seattle. There was no reason Vanessa would expect him back before then. At 44, Mason had built a flourishing logistics business from practically nothing, having bounced around the foster care system through most of his childhood. He met Vanessa Powell 15 years earlier, when she was a paralegal helping handle the paperwork on his first major contract. Their chemistry had been instant. She had a magnetic, sincere laugh, a relentless spirit, and a way of looking at him like he was someone worth believing in. Within 12 months, they were married. Sabrina arrived not long after, and 2 years later, Nathaniel completed their little family. For over 10 years, they lived what many would call an ideal suburban life just outside Philadelphia. Though Mason poured himself into growing his company, he always made room for what mattered, never missing a recital or soccer match. After Nathaniel was born, Vanessa reduced her hours to part-time, putting her energy into the home. Outwardly, things seemed nearly flawless. They had checked every box: a thriving household, fulfilling jobs, 2 bright kids, and the quiet admiration of those around them. Then, half a year ago, something shifted. It began when Vanessa attended a weekend seminar about redefining femininity and marriage. She came back energized, filled with unfamiliar language, terms like emotional labor, mental load, and internalized patriarchy. Mason listened, nodding, agreeing that shared responsibilities mattered. But something deeper had shifted between them. Suddenly, her Tuesday and Thursday nights were spoken for, booked with meetings involving a new group of women she referred to as her awareness collective. After these gatherings, she would return either visibly animated or eerily withdrawn, emotionally out of reach. One night, when Mason gently asked if something was bothering her, she replied with quiet intensity, "You don't understand what it's like to disappear into motherhood and marriage. I'm trying to find the woman I was before becoming Mrs. Trenton." Mason didn't press further. He gave her space. He tried to adapt, took on more chores, cooked dinner when she was out, even hired help to ease the household load. But no matter what he did, the emotional divide only widened. A soft knock at his office door brought him back to the present, his assistant. "Car's waiting outside, Mr. Trenton. We'll need to leave now if you're catching that flight." His voice steady, Mason responded, "Change of plans. Book me the earliest flight home to Philadelphia." The notification hadn't only reported movement, it had included a short video clip. 8 seconds long. The door to the bedroom opening. A man's hand, unfamiliar yet unsettlingly confident, reaching inside. Vanessa laughing as she was pulled into the room, her blouse unbuttoned. That laugh, it was unmistakably hers, bright, delighted, echoing through the space they had built together. From the back seat of his rideshare, Mason watched as familiar streets scrolled by like footage from a life no longer his. He had already made the calls. Sabrina was at volleyball practice. Nathaniel was working on a school assignment at a friend's house. Good. They wouldn't be home. As the vehicle slowed in front of his house, Mason noticed a sleek, unfamiliar black Audi parked across the street. He paid the driver, stepped out, and approached the front door. His grip tightened around the keys. His heart pounded so violently it felt like it might break through his ribcage. The house met him not with peace, but a terrible stillness, the kind that suffocates. He moved through the entry hall with determination, past smiling family portraits that now seemed like cruel reminders of what was being lost. Without a word, he set down his briefcase and made his way to the stairs. Then came the sound, from upstairs, her laugh. That same laugh that once felt like home. Now it belonged to someone else, in their space, their bedroom. Mason inhaled deeply and climbed. He didn't confront her. Not that day, not the day after. For 2 full weeks, he kept silent. No accusations, no arguments. He needed clarity, to see her betrayal fully, without distortion. And slowly, the signs began to emerge. Sabrina had grown reserved, careful with her words. Nathaniel, barely 12, was starting to act out in school. Just a month earlier, Vanessa had missed his science fair, the first school event she'd ever skipped. She'd said it was her feminist book club, part of her personal evolution. Mason found himself shouldering the weight of their life alone. He helped with homework, attended parent-teacher meetings solo, prepared dinners that sat untouched when she didn't come home. Her time was increasingly absorbed by this new community of women who, as she often reminded him, were helping her grow. One evening, with the kids upstairs studying, Mason entered the living room. Vanessa was lounging on the couch, half a glass of wine beside her, smiling at something on her phone. "Who is he?" he asked, his voice steady, low. Her head jerked up. Surprise flared in her eyes before giving way to something colder. "What are you talking about?" "The man you brought into our bedroom. 2 Tuesdays ago. I was supposed to be in Seattle." Her face paled for a heartbeat, then turned stony. "You've been spying on me? Did you install hidden cameras? That's abusive, Mason." His teeth clenched. "Security cameras, we put them in a year ago, after the Hendersons got broken into. You were there. You agreed." He took a step forward. "Don't try to rewrite this." "I don't have to answer to you," she snapped, rising from the couch. This need to control me? You don't get to do that." "Control?" he said, voice cracking with disbelief. "Since when did being faithful become a form of oppression?" "Our marriage," she said, her tone slipping into that same lingo she'd adopted in recent months, "is based on outdated expectations. Monogamy is just another way society tries to regulate women's bodies. That's what Penelope says." "Penelope," Mason repeated, as if tasting the name for the first time. "The leader of your personal empowerment circle? And does Penelope know you're lying to your husband and ignoring your kids?" Color rushed to Vanessa's cheeks. "I'm not ignoring anyone. she shot back. For once, I'm just choosing to prioritize myself after years of putting everyone else first. Maybe it's time to think about an open marriage, the woman offered gently. Plenty of couples find it liberating. An open marriage? Mason repeated, his tone flat and ice-cold. You're already having an affair, Vanessa. This isn't some bold new journey of self-discovery. You're just chasing retroactive approval for something you've already done. I feel seen with Darren, Vanessa admitted suddenly, the name slipping from her lips before she could stop it. Darren, Mason echoed, slowly letting the name settle in his mind. Does he also understand that while you've been on this journey, your daughter cried herself to sleep because you missed her volleyball championship? Or that Nathaniel's teacher called because he got into another fight at school? Don't you dare use the kids to manipulate me, Vanessa snapped, her voice cracking with fury. Penelope told me you'd try this, dragging out tired patriarchal guilt to shove me back into my box. Mason looked at her carefully. Same eyes, same voice, but something fundamental had either shifted or been unmasked. Was this who she'd always been? Who is he exactly? He asked again, his voice calmer now. He's a coach, she said stiffly. Focuses on female empowerment. He's part of Penelope's network. He helps women like me reconnect with who they really are, not just somebody's wife, not just a mother. The real you, Mason repeated. Well, now I'm getting a glimpse too, maybe for the first time. Without another word, he turned and walked into his home office, closing the door behind him. Once alone, he opened his laptop and began searching for divorce attorneys. Later that night, while Vanessa slept soundly beside him, Mason quietly picked up her phone. The lock screen code hadn't changed, still Sabrina's birthday. He opened her messages and scrolled through the conversations with Darren Foster. It was all there, 3 months' worth of texts revealing the affair in explicit detail. What chilled him even more were the texts with Penelope Monroe. It wasn't spontaneous. This had been calculated. A slow, methodical plan to transition into an open relationship, or, failing that, a full split. Getting the kids will be the hardest part, one message read. But Darren's friend is a family attorney. He says I can frame Mason as emotionally controlling. His crazy work hours make him look like a distant, unreliable dad. A wave of nausea rolled over Mason. They weren't just leaving him. They were plotting to take his children, twisting the very thing he worked so hard for, the hours he poured into providing for them, into evidence that he wasn't a fit father. He put the phone back, exactly as he found it, then walked down the hall to the guest room, where he'd been sleeping for the past week. He didn't sleep that night. But something else arrived in the silence. Resolve. Mason Trenton began to plan. The next morning, his first call was to Lance Donovan, an old college friend who now had a reputation as one of Philadelphia's most ruthless divorce lawyers. Lance was known for tearing apart even the most complex cases. They hadn't spoken much over the years, aside from briefly catching up at a recent charity gala. After hearing everything over breakfast at a quiet diner on the edge of town, Lance put down his coffee. You're sure this is the path you want to take? I've never been more certain, Mason said firmly. Then we go nuclear out of the gate, Lance said, eyes steady. No warnings, no olive branches. Once you pull the pin, this gets ugly fast. I'm ready. Lance laid out the strategy. In Pennsylvania, you could legally document a partner's infidelity if you had reasonable suspicion. He advised Mason to gather financial records, log every example of parental neglect, and build a detailed portrait of himself as the stable, consistent caregiver. And what about the guy? Darren Foster, Mason asked. Lance tapped his screen. Already on it. Early intel's not promising. For him. 3 former clients, all married, all divorced shortly after he got involved. Then he vanished once the settlements were finalized. So he's a predator, Mason said, almost to himself. We'll call it a behavioral pattern, Lance replied. One that works in our favor. For the next 3 weeks, Mason became a man of documentation. He downloaded a legally approved audio recording app to catch key conversations. He noted each time Vanessa left suddenly, every time she lashed out, and the effect her choices had on the kids. He also made sure to record his own contributions, cooking meals, helping with homework, handling bedtime routines. Then one evening, as he sifted through notes in his office, there was a soft knock. Sabrina stepped in quietly. "Dad?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Can we talk about Mom?" He set down his pen right away. "Of course, sweetheart." "She got really mad yesterday when I asked for help with my college application. Said I was being needy, that she needed space." Sabrina's voice cracked. She's never spoken to me like that before. Anger pulsed through Mason, but his face stayed calm. He discreetly started the recorder on his phone. "Tell me exactly what happened." Sabrina recounted the moment. Her mother had been on a call with someone she kept referring to as Darren. When Sabrina asked for feedback on her essay, Vanessa snapped, accused her of always interrupting, of being just like Mason, always needing something when she was finally doing something for herself. "She made me cry," Sabrina whispered, blinking back tears. Mason reached out and held her tightly. "I'm so sorry she said that. It's not okay. None of this is your fault. I promise you, this will be handled." But before the week could draw to a close, Nathaniel found himself in yet another incident at school. When Mason arrived to retrieve him from the principal's office, Nathaniel slumped into the passenger seat, his gaze hard and unreadable. "He called Mom a whore," he muttered, eyes locked on the passing scenery. "Said his dad saw her kissing some guy at Riverside Park." Mason's hands tightened on the wheel until his knuckles turned white. "You didn't mention this before. Did you hit him?" "What would you have done?" Nathaniel snapped. "You're never around anyway." The words landed like a punch, but beneath them Mason could hear the trembling edge of fear. "I'm here now, Nathaniel, and I'm not going anywhere." That night, once the kids had gone to bed, Mason confronted Vanessa again. "Words getting around," he said evenly, though there was steel in his tone. "People have seen you with him. The kids are catching it at school." Vanessa stood by the mirror, brushing on mascara. Despite the late hour, she was dressed like she was heading out to a cocktail bar. "This town survives on gossip," she said dismissively, "which is exactly why I need to get away from this claustrophobic little bubble." "And our children?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Just collateral damage in your escape plan?" "Oh, don't be so theatrical," she shot back. "They're old enough to start figuring things out on their own. My mom smothered me, and I spent years in therapy undoing that mess." As she slicked on a lipstick shade he didn't recognize, Mason felt something inside him lock into place. "Where are you going?" "It's a school night, Vanessa." "There's a seminar downtown. Women's financial independence. I don't appreciate the third degree." After she left, Mason quietly followed at a distance. As he feared, she pulled up to a sleek high-rise downtown. Using the zoom lens on his camera, he watched as she approached a tall man in a designer suit. Too enthusiastic, too familiar. Darren Foster. Mason recognized him immediately from her social media. That night, he made 2 phone calls. One to a private investigator recommended by his friend Lance, the other to his sister in Denver. "I need backup," he said quietly. "I'm booking a flight now," Beverly answered without hesitation. A storm was on its way, and Mason Trenton was ready to meet it. Beverly landed the next morning, brisk and battle-ready. At 45, 3 years older than Mason, she had never married. Instead, she had carved out a respected career as a child psychologist, experience that now made her more than just family. She was the expert they needed. After a day spent observing Nathaniel and Sabrina while Mason worked, she shared her conclusion. "These kids are hurting, Mason. What you're seeing, Nathaniel's aggression, Sabrina barely speaking, that's not standard teenage angst. That's emotional trauma. They're feeling abandoned." Mason said nothing, jaw set tight. "Write it all down," he said at last. "Your notes might end up being key in court." Later that evening, he asked Beverly to take the kids out for a treat, ice cream, maybe a movie. Once the house was silent, he settled into the living room, a manila folder spread open on the coffee table. Vanessa had actually messaged that she'd be home for dinner, for once. Her words. She walked in just after 9, her heels clicking against the hardwood, purse dangling from her wrist. "Where are the kids?" she asked, eyes scanning the room. "With Beverly," Mason answered. "She's in town." A flash of surprise flickered across her face, quickly masked by suspicion. "You didn't say she was visiting." "And you didn't mention Darren Foster," Mason said, voice even. "Seems we've both been keeping secrets." Her cheeks colored. "I was going to tell you when the timing felt right." "The right time," he said coldly. "Would have been before you brought him into our bedroom, before you started planning to take the kids from me." She froze in place. "You went through my phone?" "That's your concern?" he asked, stunned. "Not the part where you're preparing to use fabricated claims to take my children?" "They're not made up," she said sharply. "You're manipulative. You want me to feel ashamed for finally trying to be myself." Mason leaned in, his voice low and razor-sharp. "If being yourself means abandoning your kids, betraying our family, and pretending you're the victim, then yeah, I guess you're finally showing your true colors." "You think I don't feel trapped?" she exploded. 15 years of this, of feeling invisible, and what do I have to show for it? What about my dreams?" "What dreams did I ever stop you from chasing?" Mason asked quietly. "When you left law school, I supported you. When the house overwhelmed you, I hired help. When Nathaniel started school, I encouraged you to work again. Did I ever say no?" She looked away, her voice faltering. "That's not the point." "No," he said softly. "The point is, you let a predator in, a man with a track record of wrecking families, and instead of owning that, you're spinning this into some self-liberation story." "Darren believes in me," she whispered. "He sees what I can become." "No," Mason said, rising to his feet. "He sees someone easy to manipulate, and a family he can destroy for sport." "See the pattern yet?" Lance leaned in, voice low and sharp. "He targets unhappy wives, pushes them toward messy divorces, then disappears once the damage is done." "That's not true," she replied, though her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Across the table, Mason methodically opened a file folder, spreading out pages, background checks, financial records, and a series of case notes that painted a very specific picture of Darren Foster. The pattern Lance had warned about was undeniable. "He's drowning in liabilities," Mason murmured. "His so-called life coaching gig? Falling apart. 3 months behind on rent. But he hides it well. Flashy dinners, lavish hotel rooms. You think he's your ticket forward. To him, you're just the next revenue stream." Vanessa's eyes scanned the documents, her once firm composure unraveling with each line she read. "I filed this morning," Mason continued, his tone unflinching. "Divorce, full custody. The documentation is airtight. Your neglect, the toxic atmosphere you've created for the kids. It's all on record." "You can't be serious," she whispered, barely audible. "I'm already in motion." He stood slowly. "You have until Friday. Fight me in court if you want. It'll be public, ugly. Everything will come out. The affair, your absence, the way you've tried to erase me from our kids' lives." He nodded toward a plain envelope on the table. "Or you can take that. It's a settlement. Clean. Preserves some of your dignity, and you still get fair visitation." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're trying to take them from me." "No, Vanessa. You gave up your role a long time ago. I'm just formalizing it." He moved toward the door. "I'll be at Beverly's tonight. The kids are staying here. Think carefully before you make your next move." As he left, he heard her break down. But it wasn't the performative crying he'd grown numb to. This was real, cracked, desperate. And for the first time since discovering the truth, Mason felt absolutely nothing. She rejected the deal. Instead, she reached out to Penelope Monroe, who connected her with a high-powered attorney known for taking on divorce cases framed as feminist resistance, Talia Rodriguez. Within days, emergency filings were submitted, accusing Mason of psychological manipulation and financial abuse. "She says you were controlling her finances, monitoring her phone," Lance reported during a strategy session. "They're calling it coercive control." Mason kept his voice calm. "She's always had access. Everything was in both our names. She's rewriting history." "They're spinning it hard," Lance said grimly. "They're also dredging up your background, arguing your time in foster care makes you emotionally unstable, not fit for solo custody." Mason clenched his jaw. "She's weaponizing the most personal things I ever shared with her." "There's more," Lance added. "They've requested records from your couples counseling 3 years ago." The memory was sharp. He'd gone willingly, hoping to reconnect, to save something already fraying. Now those sessions were evidence against him. "What else?" Mason asked, ice in his voice. "They're trying for a temporary restraining order. Claim you frightened her during that last meeting." "I never threatened her." "Do you have proof?" Mason pulled out his phone. "I recorded the whole thing." Lance's expression shifted into something almost smug. "They don't know that, do they? Let them walk into their own ambush." A court date was set for the following week. Until then, a judge's order barred Mason from the home. Beverly moved in to help care for the kids, who were trying to make sense of the sudden chaos. One night at his temporary apartment, his daughter Sabrina paused during dinner. "Mom says you want to control everything. That's why this is happening. She said you put some kind of tracking app on her phone." "Do you think that's true?" Mason asked gently. Sabrina looked down, uncertain. "I don't know what to believe." Nathaniel, always more direct, chimed in. "She hasn't cared for weeks. Now suddenly she's buying us stuff, pretending everything's perfect. It's fake. Last month she yelled at me for asking for new shoes. Now she's throwing money around." Mason took notes after each interaction, just as Lance had instructed. A timeline was taking shape. Vanessa's emotional volatility laid bare. Then, 3 days before the hearing, the investigator's report arrived. Darren Foster wasn't just an opportunist. He was part of a coordinated scheme with Penelope. They had a system: find married women in stable, affluent homes, convince them they were stifled, then present Darren as their savior. "He cuts them off from loved ones," the investigator explained. "It's a repeat playbook, 7 times across 3 states, same results. As soon as the divorce is done, he's gone." He laid out a series of photographs. Different women, different cities, all entangled with Darren, all following the same script. In 2 of the cases, the husbands didn't make it out. Suicide. The women? Left with nothing. Empty accounts. Broken lives. Mason fought back the sick twist in his gut. But he didn't let it show. The truth was grotesque. But at last, it was his. Foster had a habit. He never stayed with any of them more than 6 months after the divorce papers were signed. The day before the court date, Mason received a message from Vanessa. "We need to talk. No lawyers." They agreed to meet at a cafe downtown, neutral territory. Vanessa appeared drained, her usual poise dulled by something deeper. She didn't waste time. "Darren says I should push for full custody and demand the highest tier of alimony," she said flatly. Talia believes we can claim 70% of the assets and secure ongoing financial support. Mason didn't blink. And what do you think? She hesitated, her voice wavering. I think I've made my share of mistakes. But at this stage, undoing it all feels impossible. Penelope insists turning back would be surrendering to the patriarchy. She doesn't have children at stake, Mason replied softly. And she sure as hell isn't thinking about what's best for you. What are you saying? She asked sharply. Mason didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pushed a slim folder across the table. Penelope and Darren have done this before, at least 7 times. They target vulnerable women, fuel them with legal aggression, and vanish once they've taken their share. Vanessa opened the folder, scanning the pages. Her skin went pale. This could be completely made up. Call the women listed, Mason said, pointing to a page filled with names and numbers. Listen to their stories. Ask them how their lives looked after the dust settled. Her fingers shook slightly. Even if it's true, I can't go back. I felt like I didn't even exist, Mason. That was never what I wanted for you, he said, genuine regret in his voice. But your decisions made our kids feel like they didn't matter. 15 years of trust, shattered. Some things you can't unbreak. So where does that leave us? She asked quietly. Tomorrow, I'm submitting documentation. Your affair, your distance from the children, your involvement with Foster and Monroe to alienate them from me. Your lawyer's going to use my past in foster care and my therapy history to try and discredit me. The judge will decide who's telling the truth. Mason stood. But make no mistake, I will do whatever it takes to protect our kids from the chaos you've dragged into their world. If that means exposing every lie in court, I won't hesitate. Tears brimmed in Vanessa's eyes. This wasn't how I wanted things to end. Motive stopped mattering the moment you acted, Mason said, then turned and walked away without looking back. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation as Judge Patricia Watkins, renowned for her hard-nosed rulings in family law, called the emergency session to order. Vanessa's attorney, Talia Rodriguez, opened with a fiery case, painting Mason as a controlling spouse who used money and power to keep his wife in check. He monitored her movements constantly, Rodriguez declared. Her freedom was stripped, her friendships questioned. When she sought independence through feminist circles and education, he retaliated with intimidation and subtle coercion. Mason remained impassive as her allegations were laid out. During cross-examination, Lance Cross methodically dismantled Vanessa's claims. You testified Mr. Trenton tracked your location without consent. Were you not informed the security system was installed after a neighborhood break-in? Yes, but did you raise any objections at the time? No, but that's not the issue. You allege he interfered with your personal relationships. Can you name one individual he explicitly forbade you from seeing? Vanessa paused. It wasn't direct. It was more nuanced. Nuanced enough that you can't provide a single example, Lance countered. When Mason took the stand, his demeanor was calm and composed. He spoke of how Vanessa had slowly pulled away from the family, leaving emotional voids the children couldn't fill. Then he submitted audio recordings. Vanessa dismissing their daughter's distress, plotting to portray Mason as abusive for strategic gain, and confessing to inviting Darren Foster into their bed while still married. The courtroom fell silent as Vanessa's voice echoed from the recordings. Her composure cracked. Rodriguez objected, citing a breach of privacy. Pennsylvania law allows recordings with one-party consent, Judge Watkins said firmly. The evidence will be admitted. The pivotal moment came unexpectedly from Beverly Trenton. A licensed child psychologist and a relative of Mason, she carried both emotional and professional credibility. In my expert opinion, Beverly testified, the children show clear signs of emotional distress, directly linked to their mother's unpredictable presence and volatility. Nathaniel exhibits reactive anger, and Sabrina has emotionally withdrawn, both patterns consistent with parental abandonment. By the end of the hearing, the judge's demeanor had shifted. After conferring with both sides privately, she delivered her verdict. Effective immediately, Mr. Trenton will assume temporary full custody. Mrs. Trenton is granted supervised visitation pending psychological evaluation of all family members. The restraining order request is denied, completely unfounded. As people filed out of the courtroom, Mason noticed Darren Foster seated in the last row. Their eyes met. Darren's face held no guilt, only a cold, detached calculation. This wasn't over. Later that night, Mason's phone rang. The number was blocked. "Mr. Trenton, my name is Amanda Greer," the woman began, her tone composed. "I was married to David Greer in Boston. One of your team members contacted me about Darren Foster." Mason remained still, listening intently as Amanda recounted the slow unraveling of her marriage, orchestrated by Foster and Penelope Monroe with unsettling precision, the same manipulative blueprint they now seemed to be using on Vanessa. She revealed that after her separation, Darren had moved in with her and stayed for 5 months. In that short span, he had drained her divorce settlement with promises of lucrative investments that never materialized. When the money dried up, so did Darren, vanishing without a trace. The last Amanda had heard, he was in Chicago, still with Penelope, setting his sights on another unsuspecting woman. Mason's brow furrowed. "Why are you speaking out now?" Though Amanda's voice held steady, her eyes betrayed a deep reservoir of pain. "Your team mentioned you have children. I lost mine. My son's with his father now. He got full custody after I fell apart when Darren left. Your wife needs to understand what she's stepping into, before she loses everything too." Moved by a mix of urgency and reluctant gratitude, Mason thanked her, then immediately called Lance, instructing him to start formalizing Amanda's testimony. Afterward, he called Vanessa. "We need to talk," he said. "Not about us, about Darren Foster." The next day, they met in a quiet park away from prying eyes. Mason came prepared, with statements from 3 other women victimized by Foster, detailed bank records mapping a clear pattern of deception, and concrete evidence linking Penelope to the entire scheme. Vanessa sat in stunned silence, the color draining from her face as she read. The fantasy she'd built around Darren began to disintegrate with every passing detail. "He's not in love with you," Mason said calmly. "You're just another Mark. When your accounts are empty and your relationship with the kids is in ruins, he'll disappear, just like he's done before." Her voice was faint, barely more than a whisper. "Why are you showing me this?" Mason met her gaze. "You're winning the divorce. You could absolutely destroy me with what you've got. But you're still the mother of my kids. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to rip apart the illusion you've been living in." He paused, then added, "Whatever we were is over. But you still have a chance to fix things with Sabrina and Nathaniel." Something inside her shifted, her composure cracking as realization set in. "I've made a terrible mistake," she murmured. "What have I done to our family?" "That's something only you can reckon with," Mason replied, standing. "My priority now is protecting the kids, whether that means shielding them from Foster or from you." He walked away without satisfaction. There was no sense of victory, only a sharp, unwavering commitment to safeguard his children from further damage. That night, his phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. "Talia is withdrawing the custody motion. You were right. They need something stable. I was wrong about everything. It was a start, a small act of humility. But Mason knew better than to trust words alone. What mattered now was what she would do, not what she said. and Darren Foster wasn't the type to go down quietly. 3 days later, an email arrived in Mason's inbox, anonymous but unmistakably threatening. Attached were explicit photos of Vanessa, clearly taken without her permission. The message read, "Back off, or everyone sees these. Imagine what your kids will think." Mason called Lance immediately and reported it to law enforcement. The email was soon traced to an account connected to Foster, giving authorities enough leverage to pursue harassment charges. Still, the legal system was sluggish, and Foster knew how to exploit every second of delay. "He's slipping," Lance said during a phone call. "This is usually the part where the husband's long gone and the settlement's being finalized. You're throwing off his rhythm." "Then it's time to change the ending," Mason responded, his voice grim. He set up a meeting with Penelope Monroe, who operated her faux empowerment empire from a sleek, overpriced office downtown. To his surprise, she agreed to meet. "You've got some nerve," she said coolly when he walked in. She was pristine, fashionably dressed, surgically refined, and radiating control. "I just want to understand," Mason said as he took a seat. "What's the real agenda? You find women in unhappy marriages, convince them they're victims, insert Darren into the equation, and then trigger a messy divorce." Penelope smirked, a sharp edge in her expression. "Quite the conspiracy theory you've got." "It's not conjecture," Mason said, sliding a folder across the table. 7 testimonies, 3 different states, all with the same script, same ending. "Oh, statements from your victims?" she replied, eyes narrowing. "We empower women to leave toxic marriages. What they do afterward is their decision. And when Darren cleans them out and vanishes, is that empowerment too?" Mason countered, watching her carefully. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not remorse, but irritation. "People break up all the time," she said curtly. "That's not Darren's fault." "You still haven't answered me," Mason said, voice steady. "You're not in it for the money, so why help him do this?" Her polished exterior cracked for just a second. "Because men like you always think you're invincible," she hissed. "You build perfect little lives, career, family, control over everything, and assume it's yours forever. Well, some of us enjoy watching that burn." Mason studied her with quiet intensity. "Who broke you, Penelope?" Her jaw clenched, and the cold mask returned. The meeting had wrapped up. As Mason stood, he delivered his parting shot. "I've already forwarded the evidence to the licensing board. Your license is now under investigation for ethical violations. Darren is facing criminal charges, extortion, and the distribution of explicit material." Penelope's composed exterior finally began to fracture. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she spat. "We've dismantled bigger players than you." "Maybe so," Mason replied, voice steady. But those men still had something left to lose. Outside the building, he wasted no time calling Lance. "She's shaken," he said. "Brace yourself. They're going to hit back." And they did. That evening, Darren Foster approached Sabrina after her volleyball practice, introducing himself as an old friend of her mother's and offering her a ride. But Sabrina had been prepared. She contacted Mason immediately, who in turn called the police. Foster vanished before authorities arrived, but the incident was enough to secure restraining orders for both children. When Mason explained the situation to Vanessa, something inside her began to collapse. He came after Sabrina? Her voice was fragile, laced with disbelief. "I warned him to stay away from our family. This was never about your personal awakening," Mason said gently yet firmly. "It was about isolating you, cutting you off from anyone else. That's what predators do." That night, Vanessa made a call Mason hadn't expected. Her tone was clear, resolute. "I want to help stop them. Not for us. We're beyond repair, but for our kids, and for everyone else they've hurt." Vanessa began working closely with the police and Lance, handing over critical evidence, Texts from Foster manipulating her, audio recordings of Penelope instructing her on inflating divorce demands, and bank statements proving Foster tried to access her shared accounts with Mason. The most damning piece was her sworn affidavit confessing that she had fabricated abuse claims, orchestrated under the influence of both Penelope and Darren. She described how they had deliberately dismantled families for personal and financial gain. 3 weeks later, Darren Foster was taken into custody, facing multiple felony charges including blackmail, perjury, harassment, and fraud. Penelope Monroe's therapist license was suspended, and her Women's Advocacy Center shut down after a wave of investigative reports exposed her involvement in multiple high-conflict divorces. Though the divorce proceedings continued, the venom Penelope and Darren had injected into the process began to fade. For the first time, Vanessa saw the truth clearly and agreed to the original terms Mason had proposed. He would retain primary custody, she would have structured and meaningful visitation, their assets would be divided equitably, and they would all attend family therapy. "I know I'm not entitled to forgiveness," she told him quietly after signing the agreement. "But I need you to know I'm getting actual therapy now, not that manipulative nonsense Penelope pushed as empowerment." "Good," Mason replied. "The kids deserve a stable, healthy mom, even if I'll never trust you like I once did." As he stepped out of the attorney's office, Mason didn't feel victorious, just relieved. The worst had passed. Now came the long road of rebuilding. What he didn't yet understand was that healing would be its own kind of battle. Half a year later, life had settled into a steady rhythm. Mason remained in the family home, raising the children. Vanessa had moved into an apartment nearby and visited the kids 3 times a week. She kept up with therapy, working slowly to rebuild the trust she had shattered. Foster had agreed to a plea deal, accepting reduced charges in exchange for testifying against Penelope. Her case was now heading to trial. The scandal had made national news, prompting other victims to come forward with similar stories. Mason, meanwhile, turned inward, focusing on recovery, on fatherhood. Counseling had helped Nathaniel manage his emotional turmoil, and Sabrina was gradually emerging from her shell. Beverly had relocated to Philadelphia for good, becoming a consistent and calming presence in the children's lives. One night, while helping Sabrina draft her college essays, she hit him with an unexpected question. "Do you hate Mom?" He paused, weighing his response. "No, I don't hate her," he said. "I'm hurt, deeply, and I can't ever go back to trusting her like before. But hate is a heavy thing. I'd rather use that energy on you and Nathaniel. Sometimes I catch her crying when she thinks no one can see," Sabrina whispered. "She told me she destroyed the best part of her life by being selfish. She made choices that caused a lot of pain," Mason said quietly. "But the fact that she's trying to make it right now, it counts for something." "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" Sabrina asked, her eyes searching his face. Mason felt a tight ache in his chest, a longing for the innocence they'd all lost. "Some wounds change things forever," he said. "I can be civil, I can co-parent, but I can't pretend like none of this ever happened." Later that night, after the house had gone still, Mason received a message from Vanessa. "Can we meet tomorrow? I need to talk. It's important." They met at a quiet cafe the next morning. Vanessa arrived looking anxious but focused. Monroe's attorney reached out, she said without preamble. "They're offering a large payout, but only if I take back my statement. Say I was coerced by you, not them. They're claiming the investigation has caused them emotional harm." A slow, simmering anger rose in Mason. "I told them exactly where they could stick it," Vanessa snapped, her voice brimming with frustration. "But they won't let up. They've already targeted Nathaniel at school. Twice now. I've reported it, but I wanted to make sure you heard it from me. They're coming after the kids." Mason absorbed the words, a slow, burning anger stirring in his chest. "Thanks for letting me know," he said quietly. That's not all, she continued, her tone softening. My therapist helped me understand something. What Penelope did, it wasn't just manipulation, it was textbook cult behavior. She found my weak spots and exploited them. I'm not trying to avoid blame. I made decisions, and I hurt people. She slid an envelope across the table to him. It's a modification to the custody agreement. I'm reducing my visitation and giving you more authority over decisions. They need your consistency more than they need me trying to fix what I broke. Mason stared at the envelope, clearly caught off guard. I wasn't expecting this. I'm trying to do at least one thing right, she said, eyes glistening. It's too late for us, but not for them. As Mason drove home, her words echoed in his head. She had sounded sincere. Still, history reminded him to be cautious. Was this genuine regret, or just another strategic move in a long, painful game? Then his phone rang. Lance. The tone in his voice was grim. Monroe's been reaching out to your former in-laws. She's feeding them this narrative that you forged everything, that you framed her and Foster. Mason's jaw tightened. Vanessa's parents had always been civil but distant. They lived in Arizona and rarely visited, but they had deep pockets, more than enough to fund a legal counterattack if they believed Vanessa had been wronged. And it gets worse, Lance went on. You remember Amanda Greer from Boston? She testified against Foster? Mason nodded slowly, a sense of dread forming in his gut. She took her own life last week, left a note, said she couldn't bear the shame or the loss of her son. Mason felt like the air had been punched from his lungs. They destroyed her, he said hollowly. These people don't go away just because they're exposed, Lance warned. They doubled down. In the weeks that followed, the pressure escalated. Monroe's allies unleashed a wave of online attacks, portraying Mason as an abuser who had twisted the system to ruin a progressive woman's life. Former colleagues reached out, troubled by what they were reading. One day, Sabrina came home in tears. Her classmates had shown her cruel posts, accusing her father of perjury and manipulation. Outwardly, Mason kept his composure, but inside, he was on fire. He had stayed within the law, acted with integrity, and done everything to shield his children. Yet now he was being cast as the villain. The final straw came when someone claiming to be a documentarian approached Nathaniel outside school, clearly another Monroe plant, trying to get the boy to denounce his father on camera. That night, Mason made his decision. He wouldn't wait for the next blow. He called Lance. I want everything, every victim, every dollar moved, every tie Monroe and Foster ever had. I'm through playing defense. This is the scorched earth route, Lance cautioned. There's no walking it back. They've left me no choice, Mason said coldly. It's either them or us. Together they built a meticulous case, statements, money trails, intimidation tactics, all of it documented. Then Mason contacted a journalist known for exposing dangerous groups and fraudulent wellness movements. To his surprise, Vanessa supported the plan. They have to be stopped, she said. Tell the truth. I'll speak out too. People need to hear what they did and how they manipulated me. The story dropped like a bomb. A major newspaper published a sweeping expose dismantling the so-called empowerment movement that had torn families apart in multiple states. Vanessa's raw and unfiltered account became the heart of the piece. The public response was immediate and furious. 3 therapists implicated in the scheme admitted to funneling clients to Monroe in exchange for payouts. Digging by reporters uncovered Foster's sealed juvenile record, charges of fraud, coercion, and predation. Within weeks, the organization collapsed. Monroe faced multiple indictments for fraud and conspiracy. Foster was charged with extortion, among other crimes. Mason had finally won, but it came at a cost. The intense media scrutiny forced his children to face the harshest truths about their family's history. Though the truth cleared his name, it reshaped their view of their mother forever. And when the chaos faded, a heavy truth settled over him. Victory didn't feel like triumph. The void left by the collapse of his marriage still loomed. And raising two kids who'd been forced to grow up too soon carried a toll he couldn't ignore. Still, he had done what he set out to do. He had protected them. He had held the line. He had given them someone they could trust. For now, that had to be enough. 12 months had gone by since the damning exposé shattered Penelope Monroe's empire. Now, Mason sat silently at the rear of the courtroom as her sentence was delivered. 7 years in prison for charges including fraud, conspiracy, and witness tampering. Darren Foster had already begun his 5-year stint after striking a plea deal that compelled him to testify against her. Outside the courthouse, journalists crowded the steps, waiting hungrily for reactions. Mason slipped past them without a word. He wasn't there for headlines or even for closure. Closure had come long before this day. What had drawn him here was the need to honor the memory of Amanda Greer and the others who hadn't lived to see justice served. Vanessa hadn't attended the hearing. Her relationship with the children had gradually shifted into a brittle, workable arrangement. Sabrina, immersed in college applications, kept her emotions guarded behind a mask of civility that showed no signs of dropping. Nathaniel, in contrast, carried his hurt on the surface, torn between blaming his mother and stumbling attempts to reconnect. Therapy was helping, but progress was slow and uneven. Between Mason and Vanessa, only the essentials of co-parenting remained, a cold but cooperative truce. He never brought up the past when they discussed the kids, and that silence, more than any accusation, underscored his loss. Then, 3 weeks after the sentencing, a message arrived that he hadn't expected. Vanessa wanted to talk. She proposed meeting at their old favorite restaurant. Curious, he said yes. She was already seated when he arrived, nervously fidgeting with her napkin. "Thanks for coming," she began as he joined her. "I wanted to tell you this face to face. I've accepted a position in Chicago. I start next month." He raised an eyebrow. "What about your time with the kids?" "That's what I need to discuss." She let out a shaky breath. "I think stepping back might be what's best. They're still struggling around me, especially Nathaniel. My therapist thinks distance could be healing in the long run." Mason narrowed his eyes slightly. "That's not the whole reason. What's really happening?" Her eyes dropped to the tablecloth. "I've met someone. His wife passed away from cancer a couple years ago. He has twin 8-year-olds. He's relocating to Chicago and asked me to go with him." Mason absorbed this with a strange sense of detachment. "So you're choosing him, and the kids come second." "That's not fair," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent the last year trying to mend the damage I caused. But every look from Sabrina is full of judgment. Every time Nathaniel lashes out, I feel the consequences of my mistakes. So, your solution is to walk away." "I'm trying to give all of us a fresh start," she said, a hint of desperation in her voice. "Including you. Don't pretend you won't be relieved when I'm gone." He sat in silence for a beat. "I let go of anger a long time ago. Right now, all I care about is giving the kids some sense of consistency. You provide that. I don't." Tears rimmed her eyes. Maybe, after some time has passed, when things aren't so raw. But in that moment, Mason saw things for exactly what they were. She may have come to understand the destruction she'd caused, but she still lacked the strength to stay and truly rebuild. Running away was still her instinct. "Tell me about him," he said calmly. She blinked, surprised. "Gregory. He's an architect. His wife died from cancer 2 years ago. He knows everything about Monroe, about Foster, about our divorce. And he still wants to build a future with you? He believes everyone deserves a second chance." Mason gave a small nod. Then don't waste it. I'll have Lance revise the custody agreement. You can visit during holidays, assuming the kids are open to it. Relief washed over her face. You're really not going to fight me on this? There's nothing to fight, he said simply. You've made your choice, just like before. Only difference is, this time, we're ready for it. They finished the meal with strained conversation and long silences. As Mason watched her across the table, he felt a flicker of emotion, not bitterness, not grief, just a quiet compassion for the woman she had become. She would keep searching, still unaware that peace doesn't come from fleeing, but from staying and facing the hard things. 2 months later, Vanessa moved to Chicago. Nathaniel took it the hardest. To him, it was abandonment all over again. Sabrina, always the realist, simply said, "She's doing what she always does, choosing herself." Mason devoted his focus to healing and stability. His business flourished, and with Beverly's steady support, he built a warm, grounded home for the kids. He dated here and there, but nothing sparked the kind of bond he was looking for, something deep, anchored in shared commitment. On his 44th birthday, Nathaniel gave him a hand-carved wooden plaque for his office. Burned into its surface were the words, "A father is someone who stands by you when you need him most." Mason wrapped his arms around his son, feeling a quiet swell of pride rise in his chest. The boy, who had once been unpredictable and impulsive, was slowly becoming a thoughtful, grounded young man. That evening, as Mason stood beside Sabrina, Nathaniel, and Beverly, candles flickering atop a cake in front of them, his thoughts drifted backward. The end of his marriage had once seemed like a devastating blow, but out of that painful chapter had emerged something unshakable, a relationship with his children built on constancy, mutual trust, and enduring love. Vanessa, once a central figure in their lives, began to fade into the background. Her appearances became scarce, her calls infrequent and brief. She continued to send gifts and promises, most of which went unfulfilled. The children noticed naturally, but with each letdown, their reactions became quieter, more resigned. Mason never spoke ill of her. He chose instead to let the weight of her actions tell the story his words never needed to. 3 years after the divorce, while Sabrina packed boxes for college, a letter from Vanessa arrived. In it, she poured out her regret, acknowledging her failures as a mother and expressing her hope that one day her children might forgive her. She shared that her relationship with Gregory had ended. He, too, had seen through the same patterns of self-interest that had torn apart her marriage to Mason. "Only now do I see the magnitude of what I lost," she confessed. "It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was losing the chance to watch our children grow up, to truly be present in their lives. I didn't recognize what truly mattered until it had slipped through my fingers." Mason read her words once. Then he placed the letter aside, never revisiting it. He felt no vindication in her sorrow, no satisfaction in her regret. The anger had long since passed, as had any need for answers or revenge. In its place was something far more valuable: peace. Later that evening, as he helped Sabrina organize her belongings, she paused and asked, "Do you ever think about how things could have turned out with Mom?" He considered it for a moment. "There was a time when I did," he said slowly. "But now, I understand that everything we lived through led us here. It helped shape you into the incredible person you've become. It gave Nathaniel the chance to find his inner strength. It showed all of us what's really important, and I wouldn't change that for the world." Sabrina hugged him tightly. "She was wrong about you, Dad. You weren't trying to control us. You were the one who kept us together." As Mason embraced his daughter, a calm, powerful truth settled inside him. He had fought the fight that truly mattered, and he had emerged whole, not by clinging to resentment or seeking revenge, but by showing up day after day with love, stability, and quiet strength. The marriage he once held dear had fallen apart in ways he still didn't fully understand. But in the aftermath, he had created something lasting, a family bound not by obligation or appearances, but by authenticity, devotion, and the resilience to weather storms side by side. In the end, Vanessa had pursued what she thought was freedom, only to find herself isolated and unfulfilled. Mason, who had once believed he'd lost the heart of his life, discovered instead that true freedom isn't found in running away. It's in standing firm, remaining constant when everything else crumbles. It wasn't the life he had once imagined, but it was a life founded on truth, purpose, and a deep bond with the two people who meant everything to him. And for Mason Trenton, that was more than enough. Our story comes to an end here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed this story, please check out other videos on this channel. See you soon, my dear friend.